Boston, the early 1960s. A city of promise, progress, and paralyzing fear. In just 2 years, the lives of 13 women were brutally cut short. Their homes transformed into chilling crime scenes. A predator roamed freely, striking in the dead of night, vanishing without a trace. The press called him the Boston Phantom. The police called him their worst nightmare. And the women of Boston? They lived in constant dread, knowing they might be next. For years, the Phantom eluded capture, leaving behind only questions and fear. When a civilian confessed to the crimes, the city thought the nightmare was over. But was it? Or was the real killer still out there? This is the story of murder, mystery, and the relentless hunt for the truth. This is the Boston Phantom. The terror began in June of 1962. Mary Sanders, a 55-year-old nurse, was found strangled in her modest Boston apartment. Her body lay crumpled on the floor, her neck wrapped tightly with her own silk scarf. Neighbors had heard nothing, and there were no signs of forced entry. It was as if the killer had slipped in and out like a ghost. The police initially believed it to be an isolated crime, but weeks later, the body of Alice Green, a 62-year-old widow, was discovered in a similar state. Strangled, her apartment undisturbed, no witnesses, no evidence. Panic began to spread. By the end of the summer, 3 more women were dead. Each victim was older, living alone, and killed in a disturbingly similar manner. The killer's chilling signature? A bow tied in the strangulation material, taunting investigators with his precision and control. Despite increased police patrols, the murders continued. The killer began targeting younger women, breaking into their apartments in broad daylight. Judith Marsh, a 23-year-old secretary, was found with her nylon stockings tied tightly around her neck. Her apartment showed signs of struggle, broken glass, overturned furniture, but no witnesses and no leads. The community was in chaos. Women no longer felt safe in their own homes. Hardware stores ran out of locks, and self-defense classes filled to capacity. The city became a hunting ground, and the Phantom thrived in the fear he created. What made the crimes even more horrifying was the intimacy of the killings. These were not random stabbings or shootings. The killer got close to his victims, subdued them, and took his time. He knew their routines, their vulnerabilities. In many cases, he used their trust against them, posing as a handyman, a salesman, or even an acquaintance to gain entry. Then came the murder of Angela Wright, a 35-year-old mother of 2. She had been careful, always locking her doors and refusing to answer for strangers. Yet, somehow, the killer got to her. Her children discovered her lifeless body when they returned home from school. Her death shattered any remaining illusion of safety in Boston's homes. The police were overwhelmed. Over 50 detectives were assigned to the case, but they were chasing shadows. Forensic science was in its infancy, and the lack of physical evidence left investigators grasping at straws. Desperate for leads, they turned to profiling, creating one of the earliest psychological profiles in criminal history. They described the killer as methodical, intelligent, and likely someone who could blend seamlessly into society. A man living a double life. Despite their efforts, the murders continued. Every time the city began to hope the killings had stopped, another body was found. By late 1963, the death toll had reached 11. Each new victim was another name in the growing litany of despair. Clara Johnson, 47, Margaret Hill, 29, Linda Carter, 19. Some were students, others were working professionals, but all were strangled, and all were alone when the killer struck. Each victim's story was unique, but their fates shared a grim similarity. Clara had just returned home from grocery shopping. Her bags were still unpacked on the kitchen counter when she was attacked. Margaret, an artist, had been preparing for an exhibition. Her unfinished paintings stood as haunting remnants of a life cut short. Linda Carter, the youngest victim, had been out with friends the night she was killed. She was found in her bedroom, the cheerful decor clashing violently with the brutality of her death. The city mourned these women, but the grief was overshadowed by an unrelenting fear. Who would be next? By this point, the media frenzy was in full swing. Headlines screamed of the Boston Phantom, painting him as an almost mythical figure. Speculation ran wild. Was it a deranged war veteran? A jealous lover? A man with a deep hatred for women? Everyone had theories, but no one had answers. The public pressure on law enforcement was immense. Each failed lead, each unsolved murder, was a reminder of their inability to stop the terror. Detectives worked around the clock, following up on thousands of tips, interrogating hundreds of suspects, but they were always one step behind. One of the most chilling aspects of the case was the killer's ability to adapt. When police increased patrols in certain neighborhoods, he moved to others. When they focused on older victims, he shifted to younger women. It was as if he were mocking their efforts, staying just out of reach. By early 1964, the murders seemed to stop. For months, no new bodies were discovered, and the city began to breathe again. But the Phantom's legacy of terror was far from over. The scars he left on Boston ran deep. Women who had once walked the streets without fear now looked over their shoulders. Families installed extra locks and barred their windows. And even as life returned to normal, the question lingered. Why had the murders stopped? Had the Phantom moved on? Or was he still lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike again? Little did they know, the answer was closer than anyone imagined. The investigation into the Boston Phantom began as a frantic effort to connect the dots between the gruesome murders. But as the body count rose, it became clear that this was no ordinary case. The detectives were chasing a predator who seemed to anticipate their every move. The first challenge was the lack of evidence. The killer left no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. Each crime scene was disturbingly clean, with only the eerie bow-tied ligatures left behind. Detectives meticulously cataloged every detail, but nothing pointed to a suspect. Leads poured in, some credible, most not. The police followed up on thousands of tips, ranging from suspicious neighbors to wild accusations of satanic cults. One man claimed to have seen a shadowy figure climbing out of a window near one of the crime scenes. But his description was vague, and the trail went cold. Desperate for answers, the police turned to early criminal profiling. With the help of psychologists, they constructed a chilling portrait of the Phantom, a man likely in his late 20s or early 30s. Intelligent, methodical, and socially adept. He was someone who could charm his way into a victim's home and then commit acts of unimaginable brutality. This profile, though groundbreaking at the time, provided few actionable leads. The turning point came with the murder of Linda Carter, the youngest victim. For the first time, there were signs of a struggle, a broken lamp, a blood-stained carpet, and a single strand of hair clinging to the fabric of her dress. It wasn't much, but it was more than investigators had found at any other crime scene. They sent the hair to the lab, hoping it might provide a breakthrough. But the technology of the 1960s couldn't deliver the answers they needed. As the killings continued, the detectives shifted their focus to patterns. The victims were all women, but their ages, backgrounds, and routines varied widely. The only constant was their isolation at the time of the attack. This led investigators to believe the killer wasn't targeting specific individuals, but rather hunting for opportunity, a chilling thought that made every woman in Boston a potential target. The police ramped up their presence, flooding high-risk neighborhoods with undercover officers. They questioned every man who matched even a fraction of the profile, but the killer remained elusive. Each night without an arrest felt like a personal failure, and morale within the department began to crack. Amid the chaos, one name began to surface: Vincent Carter, a handyman with a history of petty theft. Carter had been seen working near several of the victims' homes. He was charming, polite, and well-liked by his clients, but there was something about him that made investigators uneasy. When they brought him in for questioning, Carter denied everything. He was calm, almost too calm, and his alibis seemed rehearsed. The detectives were split. Some believed Carter was the man they were looking for. Others thought he was just another dead end. But without concrete evidence, they couldn't make an arrest. Carter was released and the killings continued. Public outrage grew. The media lambasted the police for their inability to stop the Phantom, and women's advocacy groups demanded action. The pressure reached a boiling point when a sixth woman was found dead in her apartment, her body left in the same twisted tableau as the others. In a last-ditch effort, the police set up a task force dedicated exclusively to catching the Phantom. They re-examined every piece of evidence, re-interviewed witnesses, and scoured the city for clues. They also began using decoys, female officers posing as potential victims in an attempt to lure the killer out of hiding. One such operation nearly succeeded. Late one night, a young officer posing as a nurse reported being followed by a man matching the Phantom's description. She led him into a trap, but before the team could close in, he vanished into the darkness. It was another frustrating miss, but it confirmed one thing: the Phantom was still active. Then, in early 1964, the murders abruptly stopped. For months, the task force worked tirelessly, but no new bodies were found and no leads emerged. Some believed the Phantom had fled Boston. Others feared he was lying low, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The investigation officially continued, but without fresh evidence, the trail grew cold. Detectives were left with a lingering sense of failure, haunted by the faces of the victims they couldn't save. The case files were packed away, but the Boston Police Department would never forget the predator who slipped through their fingers time and time again. What no one realized at the time was that the case was far from over. In the shadows, the seeds of a chilling confession were being sown, one that would shock the city and raise more questions than answers. Months of silence. The killings had stopped, but the wounds they left behind remained raw. For the people of Boston, the fear never truly went away. The Phantom was still out there, or so they believed. Then, in November 1964, a man walked into a police station and uttered words that sent shockwaves through the department. "I'm the one you're looking for. I'm the Boston Phantom." His name was Vincent Carter, the handyman who had previously been questioned and released. Carter confessed to everything, detailing each murder with chilling accuracy. He described the victims' homes, the way he gained their trust, and the moments before their deaths. Detectives listened in stunned silence as he laid out the gruesome details, some of which had never been made public. For the police, this was the break they had been waiting for. Carter's confession seemed too specific, too accurate to be fabricated. They arrested him on the spot, confident they had finally caught the Phantom. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the questions began almost immediately. First, there were the inconsistencies in Carter's story. While he knew details about the murders that only the killer could know, some of his descriptions didn't match the physical evidence. In one case, he described using a scarf to strangle a victim, but the autopsy revealed it had been a belt. Investigators chalked it up to a lapse in memory, but doubts began to creep in. Then there was Carter himself. He didn't fit the profile they had painstakingly constructed. He was disorganized, with a history of mental illness and petty crimes. He lacked the meticulous, methodical nature they had attributed to the Phantom. Could this man, seemingly impulsive and erratic, really be the calculated predator who had terrorized Boston for 2 years? The confession raised even more questions when Carter revealed why he had come forward. He claimed he was tired of running and wanted to unburden himself, but some suspected a darker motive. Carter had a history of seeking attention and had previously boasted about committing crimes he hadn't actually committed. Was he confessing for fame, or was he truly the killer? The police were divided. On one hand, Carter's knowledge of the murders was undeniable. On the other, his behavior and the inconsistencies in his confession were troubling. To complicate matters further, Carter began changing his story. In subsequent interviews, he contradicted himself, adding details that didn't align with the evidence. As the case went to trial, the public's confidence in Carter's guilt began to waver. The prosecution leaned heavily on his confession, arguing that no one but the killer could know the things he described. But the defense painted a different picture. They portrayed Carter as a deeply troubled man, desperate for recognition, who had absorbed the details of the case from media coverage and police interrogations. The trial became a media spectacle, with every twist and turn splashed across the front pages. Experts testified on both sides, debating whether Carter's confession could be trusted. The jury deliberated for days, torn between the damning details of the confession and the nagging inconsistencies that cast doubt on his guilt. In the end, Carter was convicted of several of the murders and sentenced to life in prison. But even as the judge delivered the sentence, the questions lingered. Was Vincent Carter truly the Boston Phantom? Or was he a deeply disturbed man who had taken credit for crimes he didn't commit? Years later, advancements in forensic science would reopen the case. DNA evidence from one of the crime scenes would exclude Carter as the perpetrator, confirming what some had suspected all along. The real Boston Phantom might still be out there. For the families of the victims, Carter's confession brought no closure, only more pain and uncertainty. The truth remained elusive, buried somewhere in the shadows of a city that would never forget its darkest days. The case of the Boston Phantom remains one of the most chilling mysteries in criminal history, a haunting reminder that sometimes, even when the killer confesses, the full truth may never be known. The story of the Boston Phantom remains an enigma, a case that appeared closed, yet still leaves so many questions unanswered. Vincent Carter's confession brought temporary relief to a city paralyzed by fear, but it also opened a Pandora's box of doubts and inconsistencies. Decades later, advancements in forensic science cast an even darker shadow over the case. DNA evidence excluded Carter in at least one of the murders, raising the possibility that the true Phantom was never caught. If Carter wasn't the killer, who was? Was the Phantom one man, or could the murders have been the work of multiple predators hiding in the chaos? For the families of the victims, these questions offer no solace. Their loved ones are gone, their lives shattered, and the wounds of uncertainty still ache. For the people of Boston, the fear that once gripped their city has faded, but the scars remain, a grim reminder of the terror that walked their streets. The Boston Phantom case is a chilling testament to the complexities of justice and the haunting reality that sometimes the truth slips through our fingers, leaving behind only questions, pain, and shadows. This is the legacy of the Boston Phantom, a mystery that may never be solved. Thanks for watching till the end. If you found this video intriguing, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below, and let's continue to uncover the truth behind the world's most chilling crimes together. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the darkest secrets often hide in plain sight. Until next time, thank you for being a part of Deadly Secrets.